Are you going home for Christmas? Way back when I was a newlywed and a young student at the University of St. Andrews in Scotland, when it came to December that first year, almost everyone I met asked me, "Richard, are you going home for Christmas?" Which implied, even in Scotland, where Christmas is much more subdued and far less commercial, that I, as everyone else, seemed to belong at home come Christmastide. I suppose I had heard the question before, and I have heard it thousands of times since, but in the corridors of my memory, it sits back there on the banks of the North Sea in St. Andrews. Like I heard the other day in a televised conversation with some soldiers in Iraq, the reporter said, "Are you going home for Christmas?" The one guy said, "Sure." And that was the end of that conversation. But I did read Friday of the young man from North Palm Beach who, in almost a spin of the lottery, came up with a leave in the rotation system that included Christmas. He and his children and wife were very happy. And then I was over at Palm Beach Atlantic University a few weeks ago, and I overheard the students talking at lunch, and the question was, "Are you going home for Christmas?" "Sure." "Are you?" "No, I can't." You know what I mean. A minister friend of mine called me from the north just the other day. He said, "Pray for my wife and me this Christmas." I thought something had happened. I said, "Why?" He said, "Oh dear, it's the first Sunday in 31 years that our only child will not be home. You pray for them too." Are you going home for Christmas is my question. If you think about it, that's the prelude to the Christmas story in the gospel, at least according to Luke. It came to pass in those, this is King James, I adore it. It came to pass in those days there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. What else is new? And everyone went to his own city to be enrolled. And Joseph went up to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because, as one new translation puts it, I love it, that was his home. For our sermonic purposes, let me divide it into three little sections so you can focus with me on the meaning of the question. Number one, are you going home this Christmas? I mean to your house, to your family, to your wife or husband, to your children or grandchildren, to those who love you and need you. Not just in body, you'll probably be there, but I mean in body, mind, and soul. There is one place where you're irreplaceable, and that is in your home, and I include with power and intent in the relationships, whatever they be, of the life you live. There's only one of you there. The only place where no one else can take your place is there in your own relationship. In a multitude of other areas, oh, I know you, you're important, sure. And you've been more important maybe in times past. Some of you were even essential to your companies or your whatever it is you did. But that doesn't count, you see. I've been feeling lately, don't feel sorry for me, I say it with courage, not for sympathy. I've been feeling the last few weeks, it won't be very long until someone else's name is on the door. And I'll be a photograph, a portrait in the back of this church with my name on the little plaque at the back. I don't mind that. It's time for me to move along and someone else to come, but I know what it means. I worked in Pittsburgh most of the time that the steel corporation was going straight downhill, and I watched it. You know, a memo would come, cut your offices 10%. It doesn't matter who it is. Get them out of here. And then the 10% one day included the man who had cut 10% of his workforce. I felt so sorry for John. Are you with me? The other day I was away at lunch, as I told you, when they came and emptied my study. It reminded me of the story of John Updike. This isn't funny, though. It makes me laugh. Updike wrote long ago about the day he moved in New England. And the mover said to him, now go back into the house and check and make sure we got everything. And John said, I went back into the house, and all of a sudden it occurred to me, hey, with all of my stuff gone, my house forgot about me. It'll still be there long after I am gone. You've got it by now, don't you? Maybe I'm being unrealistic. I know you can't go home again, literally, not most of you anyway, because the roots have been torn out of the garden long, long ago. But you can try. You can try to mend some relationship that stupidly you've allowed to drift, some angry word or jealousy. Maybe you've drifted away from your spouse and you're caring more about you than you're caring about him or her. You can go home again in that regard. Teddy White said one day before he died, he wrote, I decided one time when I was at Logan Airport to go back to my old neighborhood in Boston. And I got in a cab and I went down and I couldn't find the neighborhood. And when I finally found my house, I was afraid to go in. The whole area had changed so much. I know that. But I want you to ask yourself the question, whatever home means to you, are you going home for Christmas? Turn the page. There's a second sense, I mean it. There are only three. You won't be impatient with me, I know. I use it this way. It's more difficult to define, maybe impossible to describe, but are you going home in the sense of where you belong? Like in the simplicity of the Garden of Eden before you allowed your life to get so complicated. The easy simplicity of youth, the enthusiasm for whatever it was that made you feel alive and positive and loving and kind. What happened to it? Where you belong, that is the place you used to dream, to use the great wide open world as a stage. Like Dylan Thomas wrote in A Child's Christmas in Wales, still one of my favorites, one Christmas was just like another in those years around the sea-town corner, and out of all mind except the distant speaking of the voices I hear sometimes before I go to sleep. It was fun, and so far back I can never remember whether it snowed 6 days and 6 nights when I was 12 or whether it snowed 12 days and 12 nights when I was 6. The novelist laments for a whole generation. How is it got lost? You're truly trying to defend your... What happened to that wonderful, pleasant, kind, good person that used to be there? Are you going back deep down inside yourself? We'll part our ways now, you and I. I go back to Pittsburgh in a loving home, very modest. But the love that was there has lasted me all my days till now. Maybe you'll go to Ohio or New Jersey or Florida or Somerset County or Detroit or Boston or London. I don't know. But wherever it is, all the prodigals of the world, it says in Luke, I made a great fortune, a whole kingdom, just like I said I would. I proved it, that I'm worthwhile. Well, you aren't. Not if that's the way it's proved. It doesn't matter what you have. It simply matters, as the book of Proverbs says in chapter 4, it's better to be a poor child than an old and foolish king. Better is a dry morsel than a house full of feasting with strife. Better is a broken down old stable in Bethlehem than all the Palm Beach mansions in the world. Believe it. Something unique happened in that original manger. And Christ is inviting you to come home That's the way it was with the prodigal son. He was starving to death in a foreign country. He didn't know what to do. And something was missing. And so he started home rehearsing his lines, what he was going to say to his dad when he got there. And his dad took the words right out of his mouth. He didn't want any rehearsed lines. He wanted his boy back. And he ran down the hill and he got him and hugged him. And we had a party for him. Hey, friends, how long has it been since you really sat down and said to yourself, where am I in my faith? Was what I had 35 years ago. Some guy told me, I don't need to be born again. I met Christ 35 years ago. I said, well, seems to me you lost him. He didn't like it. I didn't like saying it. But I could tell from his behavior that something was going wrong. And then he came to his senses, it says, are you going home for Christmas? I knew a father once who had 3 marvelous children. Some of you do. More than that in a couple of cases I know of. And he had one boy particularly that made it to the top. And his pastor came to call one day and he said, hey, aren't you proud of Johnny? He's great. I said, yeah, I'm proud of him. But I wish he'd come home and talk to me. I don't know him anymore. Blessed are the homesick, Tillicus said, for they shall come home, back to stay, where you can kick off your shoes and sit down and be yourself, where you don't have to pretend and try to make people happy and try to impress people with who you are. You are what you are, as the Pope said about this new film on Jesus. It is as it was. Well, there's a last sense I want to use the word. It's a briefest of all. The place in which the cosmic sense of the word, let's call it. One day, Philippians says in heaven that they were talking. Jesus, the Son, and God the Father. This is deep theology. Don't miss it. Don't be put off by it. Don't be afraid of it. This is the gospel. And God said, I want you to go down. He tried a lot of other things, from the Garden of Eden, which they ruined, and to the patriarchs and the prophets and the kings. And then it says in Matthew, he decided to send his own son. It was the only way he could communicate with them. And that's the heart of the gospel. God came home for Christmas. At Christmas, anyway. It's all right now. The one who owns it all chose to invite himself. The whole human predicament, right down in the middle of it all, on the merry-go-round of things, God came to experience it. Love came down. It says in a favorite hymn of mine at Christmas, you see, the example and the experience are now one. The experiment is over. In Christ, God came home. And through Christ, listen, this is page 2 of the gospel, God understands what it is you're up against. He knows the games you play, the grudges you hold. He knows it all. Before a prayer ever rises in our thoughts, God already knows what you need. You simply need to kneel before him and say it. He understands what it's like to be caught up in emotional tangles, and he knows what it's like when you get discouraged that the world isn't as it's supposed to be. My heavens, if anybody ever had the right to ask for a perfect, smooth, happy existence of 85, 95 years, who was it? And they killed him at 33. He kept his end of the bargain, and we seldom do. I still smile, though I should cry, when I read Kierkegaard's description of the hardest task of the pastor in the world. What would you say it is? The hardest thing for a pastor to do, Kierkegaard said, quote, is to try to make a Christian out of a man who thinks he already is. End quote. Well, last page. The Christmas story begins. Joseph was called to go home. The decree said it was time to return. I have no decree to read you from Caesar Augustus, but I can tell you as sure as I'm standing here with you, Christ is calling for you to come to where you belong and where you ought to be. In those days, most everybody missed it. They were looking in the wrong place. But in these days, as the Christmas week begins with all of the celebration and music and fun, and most of it still ahead, there's a decree just meant for you. God is inviting you to come home. Your name's on it. You are cordially invited to come home to Bethlehem. Are you going to do it? To come home and remain there for now and forevermore. Amen.